Hey everybody, welcome back for another video. Today we're talking the Nephilim look like clowns with a focus on the old gods. Now I'm going to be building on some of the information I presented in the last video on this series, talking about the Coneheads. So just getting right into it, I stumbled across this information talking about this ancient city, Ugarit, and it was discovered, I believe, in 1928. And by 1929, there were archaeological excavations being carried out. And what caught my attention was some of the artifacts that they were finding had interesting headgear associated with them. So I wanted to just keep looking into it. But the location of this ancient city is in the western part of Syria. And I think it's just about half a mile from the Mediterranean coast. So that's roughly the location of it. But what intrigued me was, as I mentioned, a lot of these artifacts, including some tablets with a unique type of text or writing on them, and a lot of these artifacts, and we're going to get into those, but this is just an image of this lost city that has been excavated in the late 1920s. Now, with respect to some of these artifacts, they do appear to have these elongated skulls or heads. And again, this could be some type of headgear, but maybe not, and the whole point of the last video, I was talking about how what we know of as a clown, I believe, is an amalgamation of characteristics that potentially belong to some of these other groups of people. And I think that might be the inspiration for a lot of these pointed hats, is potentially these people with the different skull types. So I was looking at some of these artifacts, and I was familiar with some of these Egyptian figures, such as Akhenaten and their unusual skull types, but I wasn't aware of these other Canaanite deities and some of the artifacts that were being found at this particular site. A lot of them have these interesting headgear or skull types, however, whatever the case may be, but I just wasn't aware of this because I never really looked into it. The god El, then you have Baal, and this is just referred to as a seated goddess, but they all seem to have the elongated head, skulls. They all seem to have these interesting headgear on, and it could be more than that, potentially, who knows. And what was interesting for me is that with regards to this particular deity, and I believe this middle image came from that site, Ugarit, and then these other two are from different sites. But what I had pictured in my mind with respect to this particular deity is something that looked more like this in the bottom right corner. But this representation, I just never really looked into it. I didn't realize how much of this representation is out there. There are many figures that look like this, and the symbolism of the as above so below symbolism with the arms as well is not lost on me. I'd never really come across this pantheon before, never really looked at it, but I think this could be the inspiration for a lot of what we're seeing with regards to these pointy hats being carried forward into our more modern times with the clowns especially. But when you look at these pointy hats, it seems like they're associated with either wizards and witches or intelligence or lack thereof in these humiliation rituals. During the time of Mao in China, teachers were paraded in front of their students, made to wear these dunce caps with the kind of the pom-poms there at the end of them. And it just kind of reminds me of this particular figure here. But I think it might all tie back to this particular group of beings. But again, that's speculative on my part, but I just wanted to share this because I thought it was interesting, and maybe some of you weren't aware of this either. So I just wanted to give you a quick update on that. And one more thing I just wanted to add, speaking of more interesting markings related to clowns, I wanted to touch on this broad arrow. Again, I've mentioned this in an earlier episode in the series, but with regards to prison clothing, there would be this broad arrow or crow's foot. I guess you could call it by a few different things. But at one point, this was a symbol for ownership by the British government at one point, and you could find it on all these different convict uniforms. And there was even some Australian uniforms that look like jester outfits, but they've got the symbol on them. So this did represent ownership at one point. But I was just wondering if it also had another meaning that went a bit deeper than that. But it also was used in the UK as a survey mark, but it had a horizontal line on top of the broad arrow. And there's even some of these marks at Stonehenge. One is on the headstone and one is on stone number 16, I guess. So there's these alternative uses for this symbol. And also on some of these vintage postcards that have Wales alphabet chart, and they've got, I think this is basically the same image, just kind of mirrored here, but the top of the alphabet chart, they have this similar symbol, and I'm not sure what it means in this context, but I just wanted to point it out. But where I'm going with all this is getting back to the clowns. On some of the older photos of the clowns going back to the 60s and prior, you can find a lot of these symbols on clowns as well. This is a really creepy image, but this could be a prison uniform. But on some of the makeup of these clowns, you could kind of see the broad arrow or crow's foot. This is Milky the Clown. There was also, going back to the 20s, they were having the broad arrow on their forehead and on the side of their eyes as well. This guy is particularly creepy, Cho-Cho, the health clown, but he was popular during the 20s. And yeah, just this interesting type of makeup that you can find on a lot of images, but this is just a article talking about, I believe it's like a piggy bank, or that's how we would call it in North America, but it's from the 20s and they're still doing this type of makeup. And I think it might be tied, it might have some more significance other than just some random design, because you can actually find the similar symbols on Anasazi pottery. This is some vases found on the banks of the San Juan, and you can see the broad arrow on some of their pottery and vases. And again, you find with this culture a lot of geometric symbols. And why I'm bringing that up is because I believe it's the northwest portion of Tasmania. There's another site which is protected. It's an area is just full of these geometric symbols and patterns, and there's a lot of these broad arrows represented as well. And we're told that it probably represents an emu, the foot of an emu, but I think it has a different meaning, which I'm not exactly sure as to what that is. But this site has a bunch of geometric motifs that cover nearly every inch of rock, causing the pieces to resemble sculptured rock. So again, it's just very similar to the Anasazi, at least with all the geometric patterns and designs and the broad arrow as well, and totally on opposite sides of the world. So interesting. And even if you go up close to Sydney, west of Sydney, you can find, I believe by the Blue Mountains, there's this cave called or nicknamed Emu Cave, and you can find all these markings in there. So some more rock carvings, and I believe we would be told they were just trying to represent an emu, but maybe not. So yeah, I thought that was really interesting, just something I'm looking into, and just another creepy clown with a similar design. So just wanted to bring it to your attention, and I think that's all I have to say on that. Now let's get into a BOB update, because somebody may have cracked the case. So let's get into that. Okay, so this Bob phenomenon, I talked about it many times, but I just started noticing this recurrence of this particular name in odd places, like on the Illuminati card game. And there was this character called Bob Dobbs associated with it. And those lyrics, Bob Dobb, Bob Doblina, they show up in at least 3 different songs that I've found, and there are songs dedicated to Bob. And as mentioned, I've come across at least 3 separate songs with these repeating Bob Dobb, Bob Doblina lyrics. And in a few of these songs featuring Bob or Bob Dobbs, you get the people, with the painted white faces. So it's just a lot of interesting connections. And somebody let me know that there was a video that somebody made talking about who they think Bob is, and they think that Bob is actually Cain, and the channel is Divine Truth 1, and I'll leave a link to it. And it's really interesting, actually, and they might have solved it. But if you do watch this video, I think the first half is kind of a recap of a few of the videos that I've made, just for context, and then they start to bring in their theory towards the middle. So if you do watch it, you might want to start there. If you're familiar, if you're not, you might want to start from the beginning. But one of the things I'll mention without ruining all of it is, if indeed it is Cain, Cain is actually, in the book of Genesis, Cain is represented as building the first city. And you have that whole Bob the Builder series. And in Bob the Builder, Bob appears as a building contractor specializing in masonry. So there's these connections to masonry and building, and interesting. A very unique video, and I'm still kind of processing it, but they might have cracked it. So I'll leave a link to the video, and good job on that. And I just came across a few more BOB references. There's a type of flag, black-owned business flag with the chevron, and there you have it pictured over a barbershop. And there's a 1979 Disney movie with this android called Bob. Just wanted to mention that. So interesting, just a note. So yeah, just a couple more examples of this Bob showing up in interesting places. So I think that's about all I got for you today. I do want to give a big shout out to my patrons. Always appreciate the support, and I thank you very much. So with that said, until next time, take care. Bye.